was also in Nepal at that point of time, and he used to come and we used to sit together. And at that point of time, Nepal was perhaps the only institute in the world where there were 7, 8 economics of education people together. Today, I don't think that Nepal has that advantage. Am I right? At that time, and working in different areas, different fields, but related to economics of education. This is a very rare opportunity, at that point of time. Professor Muniz Reza was responsible for bringing all of us together to create a quantum, a good number of people together, and that helped us to help the government in preparing plans, costing of things, etc. That's very good. And therefore, when Sharmaji is asking, Varghese, you come, so he can also say, Varghese, you should be here, so that was to the change in labor market, social and economic development paradigms. But one thing which is common in all this, which I come to this new policy, is that there was a unifying force of market. How do we incorporate market in education, and especially in higher education, was a unifying theme in these two things. So for example, ex-Soviet Union countries moved from a Marxist framework of development to a market-based, from Marx to market-based form of development, a framework of development. What are the type of changes that are to be made? The textbooks are to be changed, curriculum is to be changed. These are major changes that have taken place. And in GEM also, most of the efforts, there are many serious efforts that were made in different places. But one thing that was common was that how do we align our education development to the needs of the market rather than to the state? That the state controlled, state regulated, state funded, state decided, defined model of education development was coming to an end by 1980s in most of the countries. And if you see globally, United States and UK on the one hand, and other European and Nordic countries on the other hand, if you see globally in the European Western developed countries, what you find is that the part of this went totally market. With Thatcherism and Thatcher, from 1979 onwards, that went totally market. Others still remained more state, although market orientation was given, However, this change has changed the way in which education is looked at, the way in which the state played its role, So that is very important to understand. And if you find that any education policy at any point of time, there are 4 considerations. I'm saying this based on the review of education policies, not only in India, but in different countries. One is a concern for egalitarianism. You call it equity, equality, or etc. But it's a type of social value that we want to put. And this has also increased in the recent past, essentially because of the democratization that has taken place in society, not in education, in society. So for example, Western countries were democratic countries, but in the 1990s, with the disappearance of the Soviet Union, a large number of countries were also added to the democratic framework. And I should underline one point that India was the only country in the 1940s with the lowest levels of per capita income which accepted a democratic framework for development. This is the credit goes to our national leaders, those who are talking about the democratic framework, democratic process of development, Otherwise, democracy was something that was mainly seen only in the developed countries, not only in the Western countries, So this is something very important for us. Why? Because many of our policies from that time onwards, you find that are bounded by the concerns for equity, which comes from democracy. Of all political ideologies, democracy is the one which has the least tolerant to inequalities. The least tolerant to inequalities. Because if you understand the policy, the framework, it is important to understand these dimensions. The second one was that efficiency of the system. How to improve the efficiency of the system. Both national efficiency or macro efficiency and micro efficiency or institutional efficiency. So for example, this is very important in India. So for example, Indian students are well received abroad. When the students who are going abroad, and they do very well. Those who are familiar with the spelling competition in the world, it is always won by Indians. Every time you find the United States, they are doing very well. And those who are doing very well in undergraduate studies, postgraduate studies, etc., are Indians. Indian professors are also well respected. Those who are abroad, well respected, getting Nobel prizes, etc., in some of the areas. But the problem is that Indian institutions are not well respected. When you talk about higher education in India, there may be a handful of institutions which are highly respected, highly credible, but large majority of the institutions are not well respected. So one of the orientation for education policy and system change is also to see that institution effectiveness is improved, institutional credibility is enhanced, and institutions become more credible organizations to see in the world. Especially after ranking came into existence in this century, the issue of institutional credibility and visibility has become a major concern. The third one is that of employment orientation. Every time there is a change, especially in higher education and higher secondary education, what you find is that how it is related to employment, how it is related to this issue. Because then higher education was a tiny sector, having only a single-digit enrollment ratios, unemployment of the graduates was not a major issue. But when the system started expanding, it became a major issue, and this is not only in India, everywhere that you find that employment. And the fourth dimension is that, as I mentioned in the beginning, the market orientation. So these were the four elements which I did my review of the policies in different countries at different points of time, especially in the post-1980s and the last 40 years or 45 years, less than the experience somebody has in higher education. So what I found is that these are the 3-4 elements. By making this point is that these are also the elements when you read the new policy or 1968 policy or 86 policy or 2020 policy, you will find reflections of this, and you will find some echoes of this in different policies that we are talking about. Now, if you look at the education policy situations and changing context in India, India did not have a policy for the first 21 years after independence. So one can say that education developed, so one can say that do we need a policy for higher education to develop? And what we followed at that point of time was that a committee approach or a commission approach to higher secondary education and higher education. The first commission or committee appointed for education in this country is Radhakrishnan Commission 1948, higher education. Then it was secondary education. And then you find that there was no commission on primary education. And though we talked about primary education, there was no commission on primary education. Primary education became part of the commission only when the Kothari Commission was appointed, and that was for the first time. But it was a constitutional provision, but not a fundamental constitutional provision. There's a lot of changes that have taken place. If we had to wait till 2009, that means more than 50 to 60 years after independence to see that primary education or basic education or elementary education became part of a fundamental right rather than the other way of trying to see. Article 45 is the constitutional provision that gave primary education. It is not treated as a fundamental right. So, first 21 years we did not have a policy. Then we had a policy in 1968. And what was the major contribution? One of the major contributions of the policy was to bring the educational system under one umbrella together, a unified system. And 10 plus 2 plus 3 system pattern that was introduced was one of the major changes that brought the whole education system in the country together in one format. Of course, it took 10 to 11 years for that to be implemented universally, because some states or some of the boards followed 11 plus 3 plus two systems, so you have a different type of arrangement that continued at that point of time, So therefore, that is one. A second one which is not highlighted in the writings, etc., is that new education policies were formulated in India when a new government or a new prime minister came. So 1968, you see that. 1966 was a turning point in India when Indira Gandhi became the prime minister. The first election she faced was in 1967. And you find that for the first time in India, 7 states went, where the Congress monopoly came to an end, and it was by the opposition parties. And it was in 1968 that you find that the first policy came. 1986 policy, the huge mandate that any prime minister or any party, any time in India got 404 seats out of 543 seats. That was the Rajiv Gandhi government came to power in 1985, and 86 the next policy came. And if you see that, then we have a state of coalition governments. We did not have any single party majority government till 2014. 1989 to 2015, around 25 to 26 years, we did not have. Then a party with a majority, single party majority rule comes, and that is the time then we started talking about, because the new education policies now NEP 2020, but initial start of the policy discussions were from 2016 onwards, and Subramanian committee finalized the report in 2018, no? So, 2018, and then you find that that was made as a discussion document, and in 2019, a draft document was prepared, and 2020, you find that the policy, what we see as the policy today, came out 29th of July 2020, no? So that is why it is called NEP 2020. That is one, the majority. But what is important is also to remember that all policies, important from the point of view of implementation of the policy, is that all policies are presented in the parliament. This 2020 policy was not presented in the parliament. This was a cabinet decision. This is a major change that you find. So for example, in all other policies, we did not have alternative policies coming from the state governments. That this is also one of the important bottlenecks in the implementation of the policy throughout the country. So the people say that it is not a majority rule, it's a majoritarian rule that is taking place in India. And many times the discussions in the parliament reflects that, sometimes the opposition is not heard properly, etc. These are the comments that are coming up every time, not only in India, but also in different countries, And one of the implications is that this policy, many of the governments have brought out alternative policies. This has happened in Tamil Nadu, this has happened in Kerala, this has happened in Karnataka, appointed a committee, and in some other states also. You find that. So this is a stumbling block. So for example, Navodaya Vidyalaya program was not implemented in Tamil Nadu. That was only one program that was not implemented. That was not against 1986 policy in total. But here you find a situation whereby some of the states are resisting to accept the policy. So forget about the implementation, So this policy, one of the major bottlenecks, one of the major constraints for this policy from the political point of view is the fact that the policy is not accepted by all the states, and therefore implementation itself is in a major problem, So this is one of the important changes that we find, etc. If you look at the 1916 policy, as I mentioned, it unified the pattern, 10 plus 2 plus 3 pattern. And also it says something that 6% of the GDP should be spent on education. This is something we have not reached. We have crossed more than 50 years, half a century after that, but we have not reached that. 1986 policy also reiterated that, but at the same time, the focus was more on disparities in educational development, inequalities in educational development, and improvement in the quality. And if you see that, whether we talk about Operation Blackboard, MLR, minimum levels of learning, the establishment of diet, and many other initiatives in healthcare, autonomous colleges, and many other things, you see,
directly associated with it.
focus on. Now, when you come to 2020 policy, one of the major changes that you find is that in all other policies, till that time, in higher education especially, that don't expand the system, the quality will come down. That was the first 1948 higher education commission said. This was repeated in 1968. This is repeated in 1986 through a policy what is called a degree, leaving degrees from jobs, because more people are coming for higher education because their degrees are linked to the jobs, so we delink, so. But 2020 policy says a different thing that makes
almost 50% of the total vacancies in higher education are not filled. There are infrastructure gaps, right from the classroom shortage to labs and library. All the infrastructure gaps are there. Very, very wide gaps are there. There are a lot of equity issues. We still hear about many, reserve category teachers not. Those vacancies lying vacant. Gender gaps, of course, are there, and that Professor Varghese was mentioning how with closing of the colleges and getting 3,000, and closing of some of the colleges will actually enhance that. Insufficient focus on research and innovation. That we were always, there was not enough research and innovation there because we were, from the colonial time, we have been carrying on with the more of teaching, culture in our higher education. The curricula is very rigid and limited research focus, of course, is there. And centralized affiliation system, like, the affiliation system, some of the universities have more than 1,000 colleges. The universities like Agra, and also the vice chancellor does not even know the names of the colleges, leave other issues related to that. So there is a need for reform, and there are three things that are very important in higher education. One is that we need to be globally competitive. We have to inbuild quality, because nothing in education, anything bereft of quality means nothing. If you have a degree which you can't stand for, it doesn't mean anything. And the skill gap is there, so the skill alignment has to happen. Now, this is a little history of evolution of education policies in India. As very rightly pointed, in the first plenary, that Kothari Commission was the base for which we had the first policy, the 68 policy. Followed by the 86 policy, and then the NEP 2020. So the first policy actually focused mainly on national integration, compulsory education up to age 14, and the use of 3 language formula. So if you see the main tagline of this commission was, the destiny of the nation is shaped in the classrooms of our country. The NEP 86 actually focuses on universal access, enrollment, universal retention, and overall quality education. But in NEP 2020, we see that 4 foundational pillars are there: access, equity, affordability, and accountability, and that actually encapsulates in the quality of education. Now, if we look at the larger vision of NEP 2020, we see that we are actually focusing on making a knowledge society where access, equity, and quality are the major, it's a tripod on which we are standing. And this also has to be aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals for achieving, the international standards. Now, let's look at what are the reforms that are happening. So the institutional reforms say that, that we end of affiliation system. Now, if the affiliation system is not there, then, we have about 45,000 colleges in India. Now, where will these colleges go? All of them don't have the ability and the wherewithal to actually become autonomous. So what happens to these colleges? And if these colleges are not there in the system anymore, that means the enrollment will go down, right? Then, the colleges that are made autonomous, what kind of autonomy they will enjoy? And will they be doing just teaching or research? or like research universities, which will focus more about 80% on research and 20% on teaching, or the teaching universities which will focus on 80% teaching and 20% of research? Nobody knows. Till now, 5 years down the line, we have no clue as to how this will happen. This restructuring will happen. So that shows that we don't have a plan. Now, if you look at Singapore, when they got out their policy, the new, the recent education policy, they gave 10 years, a decade of preparation time to actually implement the policy. Because without preparation, all that we say in the policy remains a rhetoric. When we talk about curricular reforms, multiple exit entry, this has, I have some data. I'm actually doing another research and trying to get data from Delhi University colleges. And multiple exit and entry has seen a very kind of a terminal end. Some students, only through attendance you get to know that they have exited. Otherwise, they remain enrolled. So what do? An enrollment is there and they have exited. When will they come in? And what reasons will they stake? So there is no proper way, how the exit route and the re-entry route is not really delineated for the teachers to tell that, okay, there's so many students have exited and so many have come back to the system. Multidisciplinarity, when we talk about multidisciplinarity, this still remains like a, a black box. Because in Kashmir, I see some participants from Kashmir there. I was there for, this VEC courses, value-added courses and all that. So the problem that the principal said that in one semester the student takes tabla. In the other, he takes harmonium. Now in semester, which is essentially 6 months, but the working time is 4 months. So how do you think a person can even learn the ABC of tabla or harmonium, and then the teacher is compelled to give high marks? Because it's a added course, skill-oriented courses and all that. And the value-added courses, there's the kind of courses, that people do have no meaning. One college here in Delhi University, Maitri College, I can name that. There was a teacher there, and I asked, what were you doing in this cleanliness kind of course? He said, we just littered the place around and asked the students to pick it up and, write a report how they've cleaned the campus. So this is what is happening to the, so many of these multidisciplinary courses of what combination you will take. So, a teacher who is already burdened with classes in most of the universities and colleges of India, where you see that, and then you add, so the number of extra students coming, say, from science to music or music to, say, social science, there is no way how to set the timetable, how to take these people in, how to record, and the teacher workload, per student, the teacher-student ratio gets heavily distorted. So nobody knows what's happening and what is the outcome of it. 4-year undergraduate program, and that very rightly, that only increases the enrollment by a year, but actually, it has no value. In Delhi University, less than 10% students have taken the 4th year combination. Some of my next generation people, they said, no, 4th year, no, I'm not really in for it. So the 4th year actually is, and in a country, and when we look at the larger political economy, and we see we're a country where, the youth does not have the capacity to actually have another year in their life cycle to study, that, adding another year just because, you want to make it internationally comparable does not make sense. So the 4th year UG program is the research part. So the student is supposed to write a dissertation, and more than that, the student is also supposed to publish in Scopus publication. Now, this Scopus, so there was a joke in Delhi University Academic Council that first the teachers should show their Scopus publications before asking the students in 1 year, and whoever he is publishing will know that, in Scopus publications, and standard publication, it takes minimum 2 years. Minimum time, that's I'm saying, it may take even longer. So how do you get, 1 year, within 1 year time, 1 year Scopus publication? It's like left to anybody's imagination of what they will do. Moreover, the students who are coming, because of the weakened domain knowledge of this, because, the college time is fixed, the number of hours are fixed, and you're going for other kinds of multidisciplinary courses. So, so the domain knowledge has actually come down. So when they come for research, so research by design needs, greater depth of domain knowledge. So they are unable to, even talk about superficially because some of the things that are done in their other 3 years, and taking up the research is very, very problematic there. And academic bank of credit, we had, this also, people are unsure of, people are fumbling, how to, what credits, and do credits have a shelf life? If we put some credits in the bank, so will they be there ever after? Because with the process of learning is the process of de-learning also. So 6 years down the line, probably students will forget everything, and you're still giving them credits. In fact, when we were, Professor Verghese was the member of Prem committee, and we were, helping this committee do some work. So we realized that, our system is so desegregated. Some institutions with 10 point, 5 point, 7 point, all kinds of system, and there is no common currency to look at the portability of their credits. So within this, so within colleges, sometimes within a university, that credit transfer is possible, but from university to university, credit transfer has really not taken place, at least not to my knowledge. And if it has, I'll be happy to record that. Now, when we look at research and innovation, the National Research Foundation is there. Undergraduate teaching they've introduced. National Research Foundation still, the modalities have not been worked out. Who will get what? We just hear some changes happening through media, but what really happened? How do we actually bid for our own projects and all? Not clear at all. Undergraduate research has almost drawn a flag. Direct entry into doctoral programs post 4th year in college. Now this is the biggest drawback, I think, that people who have just done undergraduate, we still struggle with students who do, who were coming after MPhil. Now MPhil has been scrapped, and now we see MA students coming for research. Their writing capacities have gone, their critical thinking has gone, because with many of the technological and AI changes, we see that most of the things are, paraphrased. Copy pasted and paraphrased and presented. So the original writing skill has gone down, and after 4th year to do a PhD, I think that's not really suitable for India. Because we need that kind of depth in the subject, and in the kind of rigor it will be missing. And industry collaboration is a good idea. So this is there because industry can put money into research and get into but this is also more useful for science. When we talk about triple helix, we see that triple helix works more in sciences. IITs can get money through several industries and all that, but social science, which is I think the core sector, here industry funding is missing. Now governance reforms, we have heard about the Viksit Bharat changes that are happening. So higher education, HECI has gone to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. There are 4 verticals. Transparency and autonomy, what they're saying will increase. I think that will get decreased because of the very heavy centralization that is happening at most of the places, through this. So the implementation challenges. Structural and institutional challenges are there. How the structure has to change and the institution have to managed. So within institution, intra and inter, both are heavily challenged. Indian higher education system is highly heterogeneous in terms of autonomy, funding, governance, academic culture. So we see a college, in the rural part of the country, which is, which has a different academic culture. And also, very high-profile colleges like St. Stephen's or Xavier's or something, which can actually be at par with the university. So all these things, there is heterogeneity severe, and then one-size-fits-all formula does not work in India. Transition to multidisciplinary universities and institutional clustering requires major restructuring, and this restructuring goes with a lot of preparation, which I said is completely missing in this part. Many state universities and rural colleges lack infrastructure, faculty strength, and administrative capacities. I'm sure you are all coming from colleges wide and this thing, and what is the faculty strength, what is the infrastructure, adding classes, adding all those things have not been done, and the administrative capacities are also very low. The staff there is also very low. Monodisciplinary rural colleges face financial and operational difficulties in becoming multidisciplinary. Like many colleges which are monodisciplinary, they have operational difficulty. How do we include this? Like if I take the example of my own university, NIPA, We specialize in education, planning and administration. Now how do we become multidisciplinary? Although education is a multidisciplinary field itself, but despite that we have challenges because we're still restricting ourselves to social science. So how do we get the science component? A little bit of technology, yes, we are able to get, but rest of the things still are the same. So it's the debate is larger debate is specialization versus generalization. So which is better? I think both have to coexist, because if IITs do everything that the university is doing and university is then doing, the regular thing, I think we are reaching no further. NEP treats education as naturally homogeneous, insufficiently accounting for interstate diversity and varying degrees of development. So, we have, as said that, we've already, Tamil Nadu, southern states have done very well with higher education, but Bihar and many of these northern, the Binaru belt are still, finding their foots, on the ground. So we see that this diversity has not been has been really studied in a nuanced way in the policy. Lack of pluralistic and flexible frameworks to accommodate diverse regional realities. The language thing was discussed and many other things, that is there. And many of the states have, set up their own committees, their own bodies to get a, alternate policy to the national education policy. Creation of Higher Education Commission of India may reduce regulatory fragmentation in the long term. But who knows, whether it's going to change or not. Because you call a rose by any other name, it remains a rose. So regulatory. So if a person is working in AICT and has to deal with matters of NCT, well, what will he do? So regulatory framework, is going to people say. I mean, the premises that might change, but it might not. It might either, may and who are the people who are going to be there? It's the same people from UGC, AICT, and NCT that are going to come under one umbrella body to make those changes. And so things may not change because, things change with the mindset. And if the mindset is not changing, I think that becomes a problem. Transitional phase may create governance uncertainty, jurisdictional conflicts, and uneven compliance across states. So this transitional phase is creating, a lot of uncertainty because we don't know which direction we're going. Everybody is interpreting, the guidelines, whatever is coming through in their own ways in implementing and saying everywhere you go, so that people take pride in saying that we have implemented NEP 2020. But how much and how well is something that needs to be questioned. Now let's look at curriculum and faculty challenges. Shift from rigid disciplinary structures to multidisciplinary and flexible curricula requires extensive redesign. So the teachers also need to look at this new design. I mean, what is it that they can teach from the other courses? What is common? How do we deal with it? So those things, have to be extensively redesigned. Integration of skill-based, value-based and research-oriented courses at undergraduate level is challenging. I gave you the example of Mercy College, how the paper was lettered and cleaned up and report written and then it was done. And all these things were done in so much a hurry because the Vice Chancellor was on a trip to take an update from all the colleges how NEP has been implemented. So just to show to the Vice Chancellor what they have done, this was undertaken. So many institutions lack academic capacity and experience from the curriculum innovation. Now let's look, the curriculum is generally designed at the university level. What the colleges do is they may have a representation there, but the design is largely by the professors of that particular faculty. So if you say that suddenly you say that you have to do this and leave it to the faculty to do that, then such kind of things will happen. Emphasis on student-centered, experiential and problem-based learning. So I had a query from Banaras Hindu University saying that if the teacher knows too much, and the student is not able to cope up. So is that interpretation actually, teacher-centric or student-centric? I have no answers. So, so many kinds of new queries are coming up in different actual settings. So this it becomes a problem. Faculty largely trained in traditional teaching methods, limiting effective pedagogical transformations. So we are trained in a typical, higher education teachers have not been trained at all. They have done some academy staff college courses and currently the MMTTP, which I think should be just stopped because nobody listens. People keep talking, people switch off their cameras and just for the sake of certificate this is happening. So I think why waste that money and time of the people, and so this kind of training should be done away with at all. And effective, that pedagogical training, what is required for the teachers is not coming to the main front. It was there even in academic staff college. I did not see that the teacher requirement was really placed as a concern before designing the program. So whatever was happening, one lecture of geography teacher followed by philosophy, followed by science, whoever was available, those lectures used to take place, and the tick boxing used to happen, and the course was complete. So we need, training, that how do you deal with multidisciplinary, how do you deal with a student who has exited and comes back after 4 years, because the other students are, direct next year promotees, and somebody comes later. How do you deal with that? You give him the notes in advance so that he can do, or if he wants, the intention is clear that he wants to come back, you share some notes, or some peer group learning. How do you do all that? So that is completely missing. Need for large scale faculty development and training programs is really required, because how do we deal with all these things? Because teacher is the backbone, and unless and until he is able to deal with all these reforms, I think no change is going to happen. Risk of superficial implementation focusing on structural changes with genuine pedagogical reform. So what we see is superficial implementation that's happening. I really don't.
You are kind of, the brain instructs body to be prepared, getting prepared for taking a catch, कि हाथ कहाँ ले जाना है और कितने किस angle पे रखना है, etc. But if that prediction fails, then you get a new learning that how to take catches in future. So that spot is basically the prediction of brain, and when that prediction goes down, fails, then the new learning comes in. So learning happens due to mismatch in prediction and what is happening actually. And this is not just for these scenarios which I mentioned. This is true for all of our life. Whatever actions, whatever activities happen, these are happening because of this. That's what neuroscience theory is. So in our traditional lectures, there is a very little scope for prediction and cognitive friction. And that's where we need to build in some practices. We can look at introducing some pre-testing, some prediction questions, estimation tasks, or scenario reasoning. These kind of scenarios will force students to predict something, and then once their prediction fails, they get a new learning. That's the idea over here. So Duolingo, I think all of you must be aware, it's a very, very popular tool for language learning. They follow this kind of approach in all their programs. Then the next thing is that there's a huge competition for attention. There's a lot of social media, reels, and YouTube and whatnot. Everybody is trying to grab this attention of students. And that's where we as educators have to compete. Because unless until we get the attention of students, the learning will not be there. So attention is limited, and brain dislikes multitasking. Brain doesn't like to switch between tasks, because switching tasks means a lot of resource hogging. So brain says that whatever I am focusing, let me focus on that. But when there are so many triggers coming in, it has to prioritize information based upon various factors, and that's where the challenge comes for the brain. So all also the attention is not just learner's responsibility. In the new framework, it says that educators also have the same kind of responsibility to ensure attention of students. So you should look at designing your courseware for cognitive engagement, where you look for, say, things like meaningful chunking, alternate thinking models, emotional storytelling, or creating dilemmas in the discussion. So which force student to pay attention to what you are saying. So there are tools like EdPuzzle, and some edtech platforms have already started to detect when the students are getting disengaged and taking some actions based upon their behavior. And neuroscience is also looking at providing certain tools which you can kind of wear as a headgear, and those can kind of tell you by looking at brain waves that the student attention is kind of getting distracted. Also, there is a misconception that with AI there will not be need for memory. This is again a misconception. AI doesn't reduce the need for memory. In fact, it's very essential because day-to-day interactions, when you are talking to someone, even to understand what they are saying, it's important to have your memory in place. So creative thinking, even the thinking, whether it's creative or critical, all type of thinking requires analysis, and that requires memory. Learning from past or having meaningful relationships, all these are such things which require recalling past facts.